Okay, well, I guess I will go ahead and get started. So this morning I'm here to tell the story of how we got a handle on vulnerability remediation at a Fortune 50, one of the biggest corporations in the country. So before I get started, just got the standard thing here. Since I work for a publicly traded company, that anything I say today is my opinion, not an official position. The reason that I have a subtitle of outrunning the feature request stream for this is, as I'm sure you're all aware, feature requests are coming in all the time, and it's only getting faster. The end users have higher and higher levels of expectations, and it's just something you got to deal with. And new vulnerabilities are coming in all the time. You push to get everything fixed, and then 2 weeks later, new stuff shows up. You got to go do it again. And finally, technology is changing rapidly. And so the answer is speed is the key. We just got to go faster. And fortunately, there's lots of new technologies today that actually make it feasible to do that. So on to our fixing the security vulnerabilities. So as you can see here, we got the stream of features requests, and now new CVs are coming in, stirring up the water. So some of the background. Our enterprise has had lots of mergers, acquisitions, spin outs over the years. And so we've ended up with multiple cultures, before they get one integrated, they bought somebody else. And so lots of different viewpoints, lots of different ways of doing things. And they've got to somehow make it all work together. One of the key traits was that what they called the original organization or legacy organization, their IT organization had kind of a laissez-faire thing where we're just going to set broad guidelines, and then each product development team can kind of make their own choices. One of their biggest acquisitions had a completely different thing where, very strict, here's the way you do it. And, and it's all, dictated out, and you just follow the directions, which caused quite a few clashes. So stream's already pretty turbulent. And then all of a sudden we have this cloud burst that happens. So over in infrastructure, IT infrastructure and purchasing, they make the determination that, hey, we've got Pivotal Cloud Foundry, which we've used to great effect over the last 5 years. I mean, it's pretty amazing what they did with it, actually. And but all of a sudden, Broadcom wants a lot more money for this, and plus we're hitting limitations on what we can do with it. So we need to move off of it. We need to move to the cloud, or else onto Kubernetes OpenShift running into the data center. And because we're moving to the cloud, and the US government is one of our biggest customers, now we have to be FedRAMP moderate, or the Department of Defense equivalent, which is IL2 compliant. So and if you've ever had to deal with that, there's like a huge, there's like 300 items you have to go through it's a big deal to get FedRAMP compliance or certified FedRAMP compliance. At the same time, Cybersecurity Information Protection Department goes, hey, we've got all these, we're greatly expanding our Kubernetes use, and we probably better check to see how our container security is. So they brought in another consulting firm, not CGI, which I work for, and they did an audit. And one of the first things they found was that at one time there was a container image scanner, and all the senior directors of development got together and demanded that it be shut off because they didn't have time to deal with anything that was spitting out. So nobody knew where anybody was at. So one of the first things they did then was get, a new one turned on, even better one. And all of a sudden, we got thousands of images, and on average, they got 80 to 100 vulnerabilities, including criticals and importance. So they know they got a big problem. And since it's got to be FedRAMP compliant, one of the requirements is that you take care of all these. So they got to get done. So, so the enterprise went looking around, and one of the teams that I'm the tech lead for, and architect, is a team that like provides tools to all the other product development teams. And so they came to us and said, "What can you do for us?" And so anyway, here's the story of what we did. The first thing we did was go through and figure out, what we were going to do for the MVP. And we identified this cluster of 2,700 applications that I referred to earlier that are all on this one Java framework and very, very opinionated. And so if you could attack that group and get that done, which they're all going to be the same. So you fix one, you figure out a way to fix one, you can fix all 2,700 in general. And most of the applications that needed to be FedRAMP compliant are in that group. So you automatically fix that problem. The other thing about this is that Java framework had been around for a long time. There have been many versions released over the year. And most of the applications, like enterprise Java applications everywhere, is you create a new application, you get the dependencies all figured out so they all work together, and then you never want to touch them again because you just end up, it just ends up sucking up your time to do that, and it just makes you look bad. So they were way behind on the versions, and when we looked through all the vulnerabilities that were there, a vast majority of them could be eliminated just by getting to the latest version of that Java framework. And then finally, the migration off of PCF to Kubernetes. One of my other teams, one of my other teams was the one that did the coaching and laid out the golden pathway and everything. And so, all 324 development teams there that own these 2,700 apps, were all used to me giving advice and, had a good reputation for them. So, it's going to be easier to sell doing this to them. So that's what we picked at. The other thing is, okay, how are we going to do this? What's the technology? And we had looked at OpenRewrite earlier on the PCF migration to do some of the changes to the applications to containerize them, and we ended up never getting to it, but we were familiar with it, and it looked like a really good solution for this because there was a lot of recipes out of the box that were just exactly what we needed, and we figured we could develop the rest of them. So we settled on that. The next thing we did then is went out and gathered all the data, figure out what we're going to do, where we are today. So we went into the container image scanner and went through and looked at all the vulnerabilities and kind of classified them and everything. The other thing we did was they looked at the release notes of the Java framework, handled by the centralized team, and we found out they were very good, unlike a lot of cases. Every time they did a release, they had very, they said exactly, here's what we changed, here's how you upgrade from the latest or the previous release to this release. And so, if we could just, so we figured that if we could just, write recipes that followed those directions, that, we could get it done. And then finally, I because there wasn't really any other good options to do that, I wrote a Python script to scrape all through our different SCMs, because, you know, it's a huge organization. So they got, you know, had several on-premise GitHubs, GitLab, and Azure DevOps, all that. So wrote a Python script to scrape through there and get, you know, what versions of this parent POM that managed the Java framework, their internal Java framework. Here's what it came out to be. So this is the major release versions, and this is the days old of them. And you can see, you know, you got stuff, you know, years and years and years old. So you can imagine, you know, what versions they were on. I mean, those far ones translate to like Spring Boot 1.5. You know, even sort of to the middle, it's still Spring Boot 1.5. And as you can see, there's different, where there was big changes between the major versions. It's, you know, that's where they made a lot of changes. So the teams kind of got stuck because it was going to take so much time. And so when we looked at this, we thought, okay, where it says the 1492, let's start there. If we can get all those teams over the hump and get them all to the latest version, you know, we only need to do some of the work, and we can get a really good quick win, or, you know, fairly fast. And then after we get that going and people see how well it's working, we'll go back and tackle all the back stuff. So that was our plan. Next thing we did was put together a marketing plan, because, you know, we've got 324 development teams. And from working with them, I would say, you know, and I worked with all of them, and I would say at least half of those teams thought they were so important to the organization that they should not have to follow the rules, because they needed to get their stuff done for the organization to succeed. So it was, you know, it wasn't going to be easy to get them all lined up. So first thing we did was build consensus. So we had a bunch of discovery meetings. We met with the team that did the container security audit, and we found they were very, very frustrated, because they come out with this long list of recommendations and they couldn't get anybody to do anything. So they were kind of stuck. We talked to a cybersecurity team, met with them, and you know, which were the ones driving this, and they were trying to do some, you know, develop some tools, which really was out of their ball, you know, wasn't really what they do, and they were kind of just spinning their wheels. So, you know, it was fairly easy to get them on board. We talked to the container platform engineering team that maintained all the shared Kubernetes clusters, which I had a good relationship with from the PCF migration, and I'd helped them, you know, develop the platforms, and kind of the liaison between them and all the teams that were deploying on it. And then we talked to the central team that managed the Java framework. And one of the key things we got agreement on them was our team's going to get, you know, do all the recipes and everything to get you up to date, get everybody up to date. And then from then on, you'll take over the recipe development. So every time that you come out with a new release of the Java framework, you also release a new set of recipes at that time, so that everybody can upgrade from the previous version. And then, of course, we talked to executives to get the funding and all that. And then we went through the 324 teams and go, okay, who would be the best pilot team? So we went and, you know, got the, you know, 3 or 4 teams really excited about that. And so they were ready to be the pilots. And, you know, at the same time we were doing this, we'd started developing recipes. So, and then we had, you know, when we're all set, we had a kickoff meeting. And so, you know, everybody invited, all the directors and software development managers and all that. And so we had, you know, had a kickoff meeting with the presentation. We showed all the CVEs and how they could be fixed, emphasized that you had to get this fixed because we had to be FedRAMP compliant. And we came up with an estimate that if you were had to do this manually, if we had to do this manually, like we've been doing in the past, and like, for example, how they did the Log4j fixes, which was a huge deal there, like for everybody else. That was going to cost $24 million to get that done. And we could do it like for much, much less. And then we, went like to the OpenRewrite docs and showed, the whole recipe catalog and explained some of that. And then we did a walkthrough, like a live demo with the recipes we had developed already, and, upgraded a repo just to show how that worked. And so then off we went. We got started going. And so some of the interesting things as we were developing this set of recipes that I want to highlight, that would be useful to somebody else if they're trying to do something like this. First thing was, at that time, and I think it's probably better today, but at that time, which this was summer 2023, I guess when we started this, the OpenRewrite documentation was not adequate. And so spent a lot of time actually going through all the open source code, just see how it worked, which, as usual, the source code is your best source of documentation. And, the other thing we found is that OpenRewrite takes a very different approach than what most enterprise Java developers are used to. And some of the engineers really, really struggled to get their head around this. Others, picked it up right away, but some didn't. And it seemed like the people that were not at all familiar with the gang of four patterns, object-oriented patterns that really, really struggled because OpenRewrite makes heavy use of the visitor pattern. I struggle with that. The next thing we found is that a lot of the open source recipes out there, they make the assumption that you're following Maven best practices, which everything was Maven built that we were working on, and and Java, and some of the Java best practices. Many of these repos, they weren't doing that. So what we ended up having to do was we developed recipes to get the repos up to the Maven best practices and Java best practices before we started actually doing the upgrades, and that worked really well. And then the other thing was fixing, which is a Maven best practice of getting the direct dependencies declared in the POM and eliminating stuff that was in there that wasn't being used and so forth to get it lined out. And we ended up having to write custom recipes for that. There just wasn't anything really out there that did that like we wanted. So because there's some nuances to it, like for example, like JDBC drivers. I assume most of you are Java developers, so JDBC drivers, they're not really actually referenced in the code, but if they're not there, bundled in the app, then all of a sudden you got a problem. So, you had to handle kind of edge cases like that. So we wrote our own thing that worked really well. Another thing that if you look at the OpenRewrite unit tests in the open source, usually they'll just declare little snippets of code in line just for the before and after things. And what we did instead was we would take whole files of actual stuff. And I've done this a lot in the past with like say message processing, message translation and stuff, where your unit tests are actual messages. And then because the beauty of that is that you get a message that blows up, lands up in the dead letter queue or something, you just take that message, copy it in, create a new unit test, and then figure out, make the fixes so it works. And then, you never have that again. So that's what we did. So, as we got down the road, we ran into a problem. We just drop in an extra file to do that. And that worked out well. The next thing we did was, other thing we did was create some integration tests, like so that we could step debug through the whole process, because we were using the Maven plugin to execute OpenRewrite. And that turned out to be really useful down the road to solve some complex bugs that, or interactions between different stuff. Another thing was, we didn't want to provide a whole bunch of, instructions on here, run Maven, pass in all these parameters, and do this step, and then, then do it this way, and then do it this way and this. So what we did was we created Bash and PowerShell scripts for each major for first the standardization, but then each major version upgrade, because that's how we broke it up. Is we'll go from 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, just to limit the changes at one time, so you can figure out if something broke, what's going on. And then final thing is that like I mentioned, we got the Java framework team to take over the recipe development once we got everybody up to date. And the person they put on it turned out to be really good at writing recipes, probably better than anybody on my team. And so that worked out really well for us. And that's, that's something that, I would say going forward is a very good thing. You got some kind of internal platform or framework or whatever, and you can evolve that a lot faster if you provide a way for all your users to quickly do upgrades if you got breaking changes and stuff. So after we got that going and running, we did a retrospective. So what went well, we found that a high percentage of the code repos that we could just run the recipes through, no problems, just sailed through, which we weren't trying to get to 100%. Yeah, I forgot to mention that. Our strategy, we're not going to try to do 100%. We're just, try to get that, that follow the 80-20 rule, get all the major stuff, and just leave the edge cases to do manual. And we were able to complete the full set of recipes to go all the way, from all those different versions up to the latest version for a very reasonable amount of time and cost. I would say like 3 or 4 months, probably $300,000 or so, which compared to the 24 million is pretty cheap. And and then the handoff to the Java framework team, which I keep talking about, that worked really well. Some of the things that didn't work is that often when it went to the product development teams, they would put the new person doing this, because the important people were busy doing features, implementing new features. And so they didn't have a lot of contacts, maybe a lot of experience. And they would start doing this, and they would run to a lot of just general build issues and dependency issues and so forth. And so our support, which we started out with just our development team doing support, we eventually created like a L1 support team, so forth. But we get a lot of changes, not really related to the upgrade. It was like, okay, I built my thing, I ran your scripts, and now it doesn't build. You broke it. Tell me how to fix it, kind of thing. And so there was a lot of that. And so it's really difficult to balance that out, because if you just don't help them at all, they'll just go, oh, well, I got supplied the stuff and it's just broke, don't work. And so we get a bad reputation and we get the adoption. But if you help them fix everything, then, all your time's sucked up solving issues that really have nothing to do with the upgrades itself. So that was kind of a tightrope thing to do that. Another thing is we had to go through quite a few engineers, find ones that could actually develop these recipes, which some were pretty complex. So we needed to figure out a better way of, identifying who could do it, who could not. Another thing was just the overall job of, managing all these upgrades and figuring out who had got it done, who hadn't got it done. Basically just doing all this off the cuff, without really any good tools to do that. And then our script, using the Bash and PowerShell scripts didn't turn out to be, had a lot of problems with that too, especially on Windows machines, just pathing, all that kind of stuff. And so we got that all going, so well on the way, and other stuff started coming in. So first one was Kubernetes right sizing. So these 2,700 apps had moved, and none of the teams knew anything about Kubernetes. So they just requested resources like they would request for a VM. And so they ended up with Kubernetes clusters with 3% CPU utilization. Because they requested, every app was requesting a lot more than they actually needed. And so the company was having to buy $3 million more worth of hardware. So this, got everybody's attention. This didn't get fixed. And, like saving 24 million on development, that's kind of difficult to measure, and, nobody's gonna, that's just, that's harder to wrap your head around or, be confident in. I mean, everybody saw that number, they probably discounted my calculations, which, it was so big that even if they say, well, I'll bet you it's only a third of that, it was still, a great deal to do that. But, so what we ended up doing was developing this very complex custom recipe that would actually had to identify, match up, figure out what the name of the production deployment was for this source code repository, which there wasn't really good mappings in the company. That way, there was actually mappings the other way because they were tagging the Kubernetes manifest what the source repo came from, but from the source repo it was difficult to figure out, what's the name of this in my production Kubernetes cluster. And then we would call out to the observability platform to get the actual data for that to, figure out, here's what the average CPU usage is and the spikes and all that, to calculate the numbers. And then we have to come in, and they used Helm charts for the deployments. So there was basically Helm chart values files in every source repo. So we had to, parse that out, figure out what needed to be changed there. And it turned out it was very successful. Didn't have to buy any more hardware. The average CPU utilization went from 3% to 17%, which sounds low, but that's actually higher than average for the industry. So, everybody, it was everybody congratulating everybody else. Just as we're wrapping that up, a new one came in. This is a fairly simple change, but when they moved off of PCF, they actually were running some proxy. They weren't talking to the launched Darkflight platform directly. They were running through a proxy, and those were deployed on PCF. They were getting ready to shut down the PCF clusters completely, and they go, "Whoops! Oh, we forgot about this." Everything was going to break. So, so anyway, they came to us and said, "What can you do?" And said, "Oh, no problem." Because this is basically just a change value in a Spring properties file. So it's really straightforward. And, we'd been practiced so much doing this that we were able to knock the whole thing out in a week. So, saved the day. So what's the retrospective here on these two? So what went well? We got rid of the scripts. We created our own little CLI and Go that would do repository searching to get a list of what we should run stuff on, run recipes on. And they would run the recipes and, create a code branch, run recipes, commit, after they passed and pushed, create a PR, automate it. So that helped out a lot. Still a lot of problems with it. Second of all, is none of these teams knew anything about really understand how JVMs work, memory and all that stuff. So anyway, I wrote this big tutorial of how you figure all this stuff out and what it needs to be on if you're running a Kubernetes cluster, and put a link to that right in the PR descriptions. That seemed to help a lot. The senior director that we were under, he has like a whole just project management team. So they took over the governance and pushing this all through. So, we ran the recipes, created PR on, thousands of repos, and then they went after, they just did that list and went after contacted every one of these teams and say, hey, you got this merge yet? Got this merge? And so that helped get it done a lot faster. And because it ended up so many different teams got involved that, and it was so successful that, glory got spread around a lot. So, everybody was really pushing it. So they were getting part of the glory. So that really helped socialize it, and, bring OpenRewrite to the consciousness of the entire organization. Some of the things that, still need to be proved, that, this Go CLI thing worked, and the project management team, that worked on some of the simplest things. That was pretty good. If you were getting more complex, you're still running into a lot of limitations. There was only like a SaaS platform available that could do this. The second one was, doing the code search speed. We were hitting GitHub API limits, which these were GitHubs deployed on-prem, enterprise GitHubs deployed on-prem. And the people that ran that were very, very protective of their APIs because they didn't want this going down. And then again, we're still struggling finding the right engineers to do the recipe development, or not waste, figuring out who could do it, and not either training people or just not wasting the time, having them struggle with it, not getting anything done. Couple of things that we got going on right now currently. The first one is Lambda runtime upgrades. Got lots and lots of deployments on AWS and across the organization. And, in most cases, they provision the AWS infrastructure, and the runtime's never been changed. And, those eventually get out of not supported anymore, because keep going up. So we looked where we've actually got the recipes for this now, but we haven't run it yet. That'll be going on here in the next couple of weeks. Knew we had this problem. So what we were able to do with is so it's common. Most of it's Terraform, some's CloudFormation. So we did if you're familiar with OpenRewrite, they got declarative recipes. So we got this combination recipe that they'll go through and fix. There's golden Terraform modules, which one of my other teams is responsible for most of those, but there's more than one. So you got to deal with that. You got some that are just using the Terraform AWS resource provider directly, their resources, and then you got the CloudFormation. So anyway, we got to somewhat handle all that. And and there's actually two ways of setting it. You could just hard code it directly in your definition, or you might be passing it in through a variable, and then you got to go look at GFBars files. So anyway, we've got that all working. It works pretty slick. The other thing that just happened last week. So another part of the container security remediation, which I didn't talk about because we didn't use OpenRewrite for it, is patching the base containers. So like, if it's a Spring Boot app, you got your JVM thing. And if some of these apps, they've been running for years, they may not have needed any changes. So you end up with stuff running in production was built a year ago. And so you can get rid of some vulnerabilities just by upgrading to the latest version of the JVM. And that's a pretty low risk, change, just a new minor version of the JVM. Usually it doesn't cause any issues where we would use the same application binary. But anyway, we ran into an issue last week. And so we had this big troubleshooting meeting where we found out that there was we had a very good design for the whole system, redundancy, we're going to prevent problem here, we're going to prevent problem here, we're going to prevent problem here. And we discovered that we've made a mistake in implementation across every one of these. And so we're potentially going to get outages in production, which we ended up not having. Got it all fixed. But anyway, so one of the things was that there was a conversion from an old enterprise build thing or framework to a new one, and they did one variable wrong in there. Nobody caught it. And and what immediately came up within this meeting is, get Kevin's team, write an OpenRewrite recipe to fix it. So it's really penetrated the enterprises. They know what OpenRewrite does. They know what it can do. So, we've really introduced it. Got the whole organization thinking about it. And I mentioned that already. So what's on the roadmap? Now, going forward. The first obvious one is to get Modern onboarded to the organization, which will solve a lot of problems, but it's really difficult to get new software vendors into the organization. So that's an ongoing thing. The second one is, I mentioned how there was no mapping from the source code repos to what the names of the Kubernetes deployments are in production, and we found a lot of other issues. So we want to, standardize the metadata everywhere, so that wherever you're at, you can map, go to the other. This is proving to be quite a challenge, and we haven't figured out exactly how to do that yet. Another thing is that want a better method than having a project management team hounding all the development teams to merge their PRs. So we're looking at inserting in every build pipeline, where you can switch it from warning to failure. If you didn't make this change that you're supposed to, pop up, and inside that there's a link to the internal developer portal, where you can just go in, go to there and click and, specify your repository and click, and it'll fix it automatically. And then lots of stuff on FinOps. So, more improvements to our resource utilization in the Kubernetes clusters, improvements to our cloud usage, lots of stuff. And we got a whole bunch of .NET apps that are on old versions of .NET. So we're getting started looking at that, get up to the latest .NET Core version. So we quit paying, run the better, quit paying Windows licenses fees, run on Linux containers. Over on the CGI side, we are, and this is stuff that, in both cases, this is stuff I'd like to do. It's not, not decided yet, but I'm pushing that for us to develop a automated code remediation product offering where we just, come in, do the thing, get all your issues resolved, for a very economical price. Developing an AI agent for writing OpenRewrite recipes. So, the trouble with everybody wants to use generative AI for everything. The trouble is that it's not reliable, so you have to check every single line of code. My thinking is you can reduce that a lot by just using the AI agent to develop the recipes, and then you verify that works, and then use the recipe to deterministically apply, fix everything else, and you don't have to go check every line of code there because you know exactly what you're going to get. You're going to get exactly the same thing every single time. And then finally, developing a curriculum, teaching people how to write OpenRewrite recipes. So, the key takeaways that I hope you get out, that I want to leave with you today are, number one, the cost of technology modernization and code remediations can now be magnitudes cheaper. I mean, we need to rethink everything. A lot of stuff that just, was on your to-do list for the last 20 years, but you never got high enough priority because you can't get to it. All of a sudden, you can do that. So you need to rethink everything. As second of all, from my stories that, heard about internal marketing and all that, you have to think about organizational change management here because, this is just a different way of doing things. And so that needs to be a key part. It's not just a technology solution. You got to have the people solution at the same time. Number three, like I just mentioned here a little bit ago, is generative AI is not the solution to everything. But if you use it correctly, you can have a huge impact. And so that's why use generative AI to create your recipes, use recipes to broadly apply changes across multiple repos. And finally, which I mentioned earlier, if you've got internal developer platforms, frameworks, all that, every time you do a major upgrade, breaking changes, release recipes at the same time. And you can move get your users of those platforms, frameworks to move along much faster. And that's it. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Good luck. Any questions? Yes.
So what about this whole thing? If you're going to be upgrading major frameworks, like, are you going to go to this framework? Is there any reason why you wouldn't be like, would you go like N-1 or N-2? It's like, if we're going to upgrade, we're going to go to the brand new framework. Like, are there any requirements or maybe anything you worried about why you wouldn't do that in your experience?
Not necessarily. I mean, we made the choice to go one major version at a time just to keep the thing small. And actually, I didn't mention it, but actually some of those very far, when you had that graph of all those very far versions, we actually jumped we lumped like, after we got experience, we lumped all 5 together. The last 5 clear there on the end one. So, yeah, it just depends upon, it just depends. Standard software architect answer.
Stagger, work your way up.
Yeah.
Do you think that was like better than just like going right to the top? Like maybe it was easier to kind of like troubleshoot or debug why something wasn't building. You're going just like one step instead of going all the way.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say it just depends. Yeah. Yes.
We're in a very similar boat of doing this framework migration and going from boot 2 to 3 and doing a big migration. integration and then work on the Kubernetes at the same time. So part we're at is trying to just time metrics to how much time we'll save with OpenRewrite or some kind of indicator there to show the value of it. Did you guys have any metrics that you produced and how did you go about what was your
We haven't really gone back and you know, generated actual metrics. I mean, you know, the $3 million saved on hardware, that was, you know, very concrete. As far as the time saved, I mean, everybody recognized that they've saved a lot of time because they can see, you know, how things are progressing and these container vulnerabilities, you know, which started out hundreds of thousands of whatever they were, you know, they can see them trending down over time. And CIO is getting like weekly reports or monthly reports, I'm not sure which, that, you know, it's right on her radar. Get rid of these, and so they can see it trending down. So, but that's about as far as it's gone.
we have a bunch of vulnerability. We're starting to do scanning as well. So now, you know, 100 vulnerabilities pop up. It's like, okay, we use that as a number to show people that, okay,
Yeah.
we need upgrades,
Yeah.
all that stuff.
Yeah. When you get, you know, that risk out there, when you get up to the board, you know, board level and the executive level, they're worried about that because they're the ones that are going to get trouble if there's a,
Very strong.
yeah. Yes.
So I think like whenever you're calculating the manual remediation, you said like around like 24 million. I was kind of curious, how did you come up with that number? Whether it was like, did you use like historical data or what was your strategy for?
You know, I think it was like, yeah, you know, it wasn't concrete numbers, but I think I just used like 2 sprints, one person for 2 sprints per application kind of thing, something like that. And, you know, everybody, you know, for the most part, you know, everybody would agree with that, you know, just from their past experience. So,
Trying to find like common ground that people can align themselves with.
yeah. Anything else? Yes.
Yeah, another question. Would you say like was this like a pre-flight checklist, like when you were, you know, upgrading these frameworks and things weren't building, people like, you know, were nagging you, like, you know, you broke my code, you know, it's not building. Do you think like some of that was because of like improper like unit testing or like maybe proper hygiene on these repos? Or like when you were building these things, you couldn't like figure out why it wasn't building or like couldn't figure it out quickly?
Yeah, it was basically improper use of Maven and managing dependencies. You know, the kind of stuff that a lot of engineers just don't want to mess with,
Right.
kind of thing.
I guess my question would be like, let's say it does build, but then like down the road, like features aren't working as they're intended to. Like, did you ever like come across those road bumps or like?
No, there were a couple of cases where some integration tests did fail, but in general, yeah, we really didn't run into any issues, you know, where if it built and the unit test passed that you know, some of the features weren't working. It's, you know, it's the kind of changes that either, you know, you can't get it built or else it's going to work fine because we didn't mess around with any of the business functionality at all.
That makes sense. Sorry for all the questions, just one more.
Sure.
Was there a prioritization list of like what you had to upgrade first? Like I'm thinking, you know, in Fantasyland, if we were going to do this in my company, like we have an authentication app, right? That most other applications depend on. So like it would make sense to upgrade that framework first. Because if you upgrade the other ones and they can't communicate with that one, like there's probably like, you know, a firing order of like which have to go first. Or was that something that you guys decided upon? And if so, like how did you come up with that?
Yes, yeah, for sure. So it's, you know, that's going to be company dependent, of course, situation dependent, but yeah, it's, you want to get big, you know, quickest wins for the cheapest, you know, big bang for the buck up front to get people's attention so you can sell it, get everybody going. So yeah, I think that's absolutely essential to identify that.
Another question on so I know you mentioned a lot of like the initial work was trying to get the Maven project structure and things in a, you know, in the best practices kind of state before you go and run these upgrades. I'm curious, like the recipes that you created for that, are those like, have those been open source, or are those things that you would anticipate would need to be custom in any organization as you go through it and like evaluate your projects?
The only ones we've created for the dependencies, other than that, we used open source ones.
Okay.
There's quite a few. Like, there's even a Maven best practices,
Hmm.
declared recipe that was able to handle most of the stuff. It was just dependencies. And yeah, we thought about, open sourcing that, just haven't got to it yet. I mean, even John said, yeah, we would for sure accept the PR for that.
Mhm.
So
Okay.
just never got to it. Yes.
The PowerShell scripts that you wrote about, you said that using the Maven plugin worked well for you guys. Why did you then try to go have scripts run stuff? Like what do you identify?
Well, oh, yeah, so it would be like, for example, it's, if you're gonna run it, just Maven from the command line, you gotta do, you got Maven, but then you got a parameter for which Maven plugin to run, where, what jar to pull it from, other stuff. And there was a certain order to how we needed those run, like, do this one first, do this one second. So, for example, an example would be on, upgrading from one major version of the Java framework to the other. If there was a Spring Boot version change there, we would perhaps we'd run our framework recipes first, and then we'd run the off-the-shelf Spring Boot upgrade recipe, and maybe like a off-the-shelf JUnit upgrade recipe kind of thing, just to catch anything that we didn't catch with the first one. But those needed to be done in a certain order, rather than, having lots of documentation out there. Just said, just do this.
Yeah, ours is one thing, we kind of manage, so I guess. It's
Yeah.
not as necessary to have that, but yeah, it was good. Thank you.
I got another follow-up, like on the Maven project structure, what sorts of like anti-patterns did you run into that required you to need to restructure?
Like for one was obviously the direct dependencies were declared. There were some off the shelf, open source recipes that were dependent upon the dependencies actually be declared. Some other things I can think of is way back when, like Maven, what is it? Maven 3 we're on now, Maven 2 or Maven even 1, they had a different like built-in properties kind of thing. It was different structure, and there was stuff like that were still using those old ones. Really, had been deprecated for 15 years. They were still on there. And I can't think of what else. There were several other things, but it was just like little things that, over here, this was expecting it to be like it should be, and it would blow up. So
The reason I ask is because in a lot of our projects, we've started to go down the path of some of the manual remediation until we really landed on, trying to use something like Modern or OpenRewrite. And part of what developers were doing was actually going in, and if there were vulnerable versions of libraries that weren't being used, they would use an exclusion in the dependency to basically remove that
yeah,
library. And I was kind of curious to know, like, is that something that when you go and try to run the recipes, is that going to cause a conflict with?
yeah. Actually, yeah. Now that you mentioned that, yeah, that was a big problem. So, first of all, everybody coming in and shoehorned the log4j thing,
Mhm.
Because back, whenever the whole thing was released, there were specified versions for that. And of course, they replaced all that. So, and they come in and done the exclude and all that, and they went in and specified their own versions of different dependencies rather than the one that was tied to the version of the Java framework. Yeah, top level, just because they needed it. They didn't want to upgrade the whole thing, but they needed this. So yeah, so we basically went in and cleared all those out. So,
Okay.
There wasn't any versions, anything that was included in the master BOM, you know, we deleted all the versions of everything, so.
You kind of did that like as your process of running recipes where you'd go through, clean it back up to whatever the standard is, and then execute your recipes after that.
Yeah,
Okay.
guess that's it. Thank you very much.